Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. More economic impact payments set for disbursement in coming days. Taxpayers should watch mail for paper checks, debit cards. IR 2021-62, March 22nd, 2021, Washington. The Internal Revenue Service announced today that the next batch of economic impact payments will be issued to taxpayers this week, with many of these coming by paper check or prepaid debit card. So we're on the third round here of the economic impact payments, third round economic impact payments. They basically started out by issuing the direct deposits where they could. So if you received the economic impact payments prior to this in round one and round two in the form of a deposit, then they're trying to get that out first, I think in part so that they can say that they got that stuff out first and show progress as they're going, as well as to get the money out as soon as possible. Now they're continuing on to push out the other types of payments that would then be going out, and those would be some type of mail payments. So if you got a mail payment last time, meaning your economic impact payment was received in the mail last time for round one or round two, then you would think you'd get it in the mail either by the paper check or the debit card, and they're working on processing those ones out. Those ones might take a little bit longer here because possibly because of the social distancing, and just you would think the IRS is going to be having a lot going on at this point in time due to the fact that we're kind of in the middle tax season as well as we distribute these economic impact payments. But looks like they're trying to get these things out here. So for taxpayers receiving direct deposit, this batch of payments began processing on Friday and will have an official pay date of Wednesday, March 24th. With some people seeing these in their accounts earlier, potentially as provisional or pending deposits. A large number of this latest batch of payments will also be mailed, so taxpayers who do not receive a direct deposit by March 24th should watch the mail carefully in the coming weeks for paper checks or a prepaid debit card known as an economic impact payment card or an EIP card. So if you haven't received one of these EIP cards before, even if you got a paper check last time, as far as I can tell, that doesn't mean necessarily you're going to get a paper check this time. If you got it by mail, then you might receive either a debit card or a paper check. No action is needed by most people to obtain this round of economic impact payments, the EIPs. People can check the Get My Payment tool. There's a link to the Get My Payment tool at irs.gov, the IRS website, irs.gov, to see if their payments has been scheduled. So note that the economic impact payments round 3 are basically on autopilot at this point in time. So they had the prerequisites for round 1 and round 2. In other words, they've kind of practiced with round 1 and round 2. They're laying round 3 pretty much on the same kind of guidelines. So they should have the information in order to process round 3. You probably are not going to be able to do much if you try to call them or anything like that, or call your bank an institution, because basically they're going to do whatever they're going to do. They're going to process the checks as they process the checks. And then as the payments, as the problems happen, if there's any problems with the disbursements, then we're going to get more guidance in terms of what to do in order to solve those types of problems, you would think. And we'll keep you posted on those as we see them come through the Internal Revenue Service news here. So, quote, the IRS continues to send the third round of stimulus payments in record time, end quote, said IRS Commissioner Chuck Reddick, quote, since this new set of payments will include more mailed payments, we urge people to carefully watch their mail for check or debit card in the coming weeks, end quote. Following enactment of the American Rescue Plan Act on March 11th, the IRS moved quickly to start delivering the third round of economic impact payments. The IRS initiated the first batch of the $1,400 stimulus payments, mostly by direct deposit, on March 12th. Today marks the second batch of payments, with additional payments anticipated on a weekly basis going forward. The vast majority of taxpayers receiving EIPs, economic impact payments, will receive it by direct deposit. In addition, the IRS and the Bureau of the Fiscal Service leveraged data in their systems to convert many payments to direct deposits that otherwise would have been sent as paper checks or debit cards. This accelerated the disbursement of these payments by weeks. So if they could send a direct deposit, they want to send a direct deposit. Obviously, that's beneficial to them on their side as well, because it's easier to send a direct deposit and they can do it with less manual labor and whatnot at this point in time. But it's also generally beneficial to us as the taxpayers, or the people that are going to be receiving the economic impact payments, and that's what they're going to, of course, focus in on as the benefit of having these kind of direct deposits in there. So they're trying to push forward to get to the direct deposits whenever possible. So watch the mail for the paper checks, EIP cards. Taxpayers should note that the form of payment for the third EIP economic impact payment may be different than the earlier stimulus payments. More people are receiving direct deposits, while those receiving them in the mail may get either a paper check or an EIP card, which may be different than how they received the previous stimulus payments. So it looks like even if you got it in the mail last time, they might be trying to, if they can possibly convert it to some type of electronic payment, even convert that to the electronic payment. And then if you get the mail, if they are sending it out in the mail, doesn't matter if you got a check last time or if you got a debit card, you might get either one. It'll be mailed out, and you'll see what you get there. So the IRS and the Treasury Department urge eligible people who have not received a direct deposit to watch their mail carefully during this period. Paper checks will arrive by mail in a white envelope from the U.S. Department of the Treasury. For those taxpayers who receive their tax refund by mail, this paper check will look similar, but will be labeled as an, quote, economic impact payment, end quote, in the memo field. So there's actually an image here of what the check will most likely look like. So you can get an idea of that. I think people are not as skeptical of the check that they might receive as they might not have received the debit cards as much. I've never received a debit card from the IRS, so that could happen too. You might get a debit card, and they have an image down here of the debit card as well. We'll get to that shortly. But if you want to check and see if the debit card, I would be more likely to think that the debit card is some kind of weird fraud or something like that. So if you want to check that, you can take a look at it on the IRS website, and here's an image of what the debit card will look like, so you can kind of legitimize that in your mind and then and hopefully be able to use that properly. So the EIP card will also come in a white envelope prominently displaying the seal of the U.S. Department of Treasury. The card has the Visa name on the front and the issuing bank, which is MetaBank N.A., on the back. Information included with the card will explain that this is an economic impact payment. Each mailing will include instructions on how to securely activate and use the card, so they should have instructions on it. So it is important to note that none of the EIP cards issued for any of these 3 rounds is reloadable. Recipients will receive a separate card and will not be able to reload funds onto the existing card. So if you might be thinking, I got a card last time, what if they just basically put more money or reload the money back on this time for the third economic impact payment? They shouldn't do that. So if you used up the card and now the card's gone somewhere because it was used up, you don't really have to worry. You shouldn't have to worry that they're going to send the next economic impact payment onto that particular card, because they're saying they're not going to do that. If they do send a card, if that's the format of the economic impact payment for round 3, they'll send you another card. So EIP cards are safe, convenient, and secure. EIP card recipients can make purchases online or in stores anywhere Visa debit cards are accepted. They can get cash from domestic in-network ATMs, transfer funds to the personal bank account, and obtain a replacement EIP card if needed without incurring any fees. They can also check their card balance online through a mobile app or by phone without incurring fees. The EIP card provides consumer protections against fraud, loss, and other errors. The EIP card is sponsored by the Bureau of the Fiscal Service and issued by the Treasury financial agent Meta N.A. The IRS does not determine who receives a prepaid debit card. Sound like kind of like an advertisement for their card right there. So it's an excellent debit card if you get this thing. It's great. So more information about these cards is available on EIPcard.com. There's a link to that here. So once again, if you think you got the card and you're like, I've never received a card from the IRS, and you want to check it out, you might want to go here. You can see the image of it just to kind of double check that this is indeed the correct card. Note that obviously whenever there's money just being, shoveled out by the IRS, then scams will happen out there. I haven't heard of one that's trying to mimic this card, but I wouldn't, be surprised if something like that was out there. So you might want to, if you have suspicion or you've never seen one of these cards before, check it to this image and possibly look at this link to get more information about the EIP card, just to feel legitimate about it, that it's a legitimate card. Here's the envelope. There's a sample here of what the envelope looked like. So there'll be a link to this in the description if you want to link to that and check out what that'll look like as well. You can do that. How will taxpayers receive their stimulus payment? Taxpayers with direct deposit information on file with the IRS will receive the payment that way. For those without direct deposit information on file with the IRS will use federal records of recent payments to or from the government where available to make the payment as direct deposit. So they're pushing even harder to try to do the direct deposit information whenever they can. So this helps to expedite the payment delivery. Otherwise, taxpayers will receive their payment as a check or debit card in the mail. And I have heard some issues from some other sources that people are saying that they've had some problems with the receipt of the payment. I'm not sure if that's a widespread thing or if people just are anticipating the payment, as soon as possible. But if they have changed things, it looks like they have done some changes in terms of what they're sending out with the direct deposit, then maybe that could have caused some problems with some individuals as they change the payment method, trying to get more people on the direct deposit. So if we get any more news on that, obviously we will report it here. So this helps to expedite payment delivery. Otherwise, taxpayers will receive their payment as a check or debit card in the mail. If the direct deposit information is sent to a closed bank account, the payment will be reissued by mail to the address on file with the IRS. And so hopefully that will be the kind of the remedy. You would think then, for example, if there was some information where they tried to send out a direct deposit because they tried to get more out as a direct deposit, and for whatever reason the bank account was closed or something like that, and the money doesn't go through, well, then the IRS should recognize that on their side if they have a good system, which they should, and then they would remedy that, of course, by sending out a paper check or the debit card. Now that could take a little bit longer. It will take longer just to send out the check. I'm not sure how much longer it would take for them to realize that the bank didn't receive the payment, so we might have more information on that. It should remedy itself. It seems like it would be a timing issue as to when that remedy would take place. So the IRS encourages taxpayers to check the Get My Payment tool for additional information. So you can check on the Get My Payment tool. There's a link to that here. Highlights of the third round of the economic impact payments. In general, most eligible people will get $1,400 for themselves. Those filing joint returns will get $2,800 and $1,400 for each of their qualifying dependents claimed on their tax return. So it's a much more straightforward type of calculation here, in that basically everybody that has a valid ID number, like a social security number or TIN number, should get basically the $1,400, which is a little bit different than the first economic impact payment. And I think that's what they kind of learned from the first and second. They want to make it as easy as possible. You can debate as to whether that's good or not with regards to, just policy, but it's easy to send out just basically everybody the $1,400. Last time they also had differences for the age limit. So if someone was a qualifying child and they were under 17 and whatnot, we had issues with that kind of situation, and they were paid less even if a qualifying child, and if they were over 17 and a dependent, then they may not have gotten a payment. So all of that should be simplified by just basically giving the $1,400 to everybody with a valid number, in essence, except in situations where there's an income limitation, an AGI income limitation, meaning your income's over a certain threshold, it will then phase out. So that would mean if single, $1,400. If married, then because the IRS sees you as basically one entity for taxes, you would get twice that much, because it's still basically $1,400 per person. That would be the $2,800, unless you hit the AGI limitation. And then the dependents was really the issue before. And the fact that some dependents, like college students who are over 17, but they still could have been claimed as a dependent on the parents' tax return and whatnot, they have the way it was set up before, they had incentive to try to claim themselves as not a dependent in 2020 possibly, because then they may get access to the economic impact payment and this kind of thing. We don't have that kind of incentive here, because if they are claimed as a dependent, even if over 17, it looks like they should still get the $1,400. So the problem or the issue is the same issue we've always had, which would be, if you're a college student, your question is, do you want to file your own taxes or be claimed as a dependent on the parent's tax return? And the questions are usually divided into two things. One, what would be the biggest tax benefit as a total to be claimed as a dependent or not? Am I a dependent? What would be the tax benefit of being claimed as a dependent or not claimed as a dependent? Usually, if you're, it would be beneficial to be claimed as a dependent oftentimes if you're a full-time student on college. And then if the other issue, of course, is the fact that that $1,400 for the dependents will then be going to the person who filed the tax return, which will be the parent generally. So then you got a distribution problem in terms of who should get, the $1,400, and that's a standard type of problem. So in any case, this shouldn't give people incentives to try to think about whether or not they should not be a dependent. They should just, do they qualify as a dependent or not? Are they a qualifying student and whatnot? This shouldn't have pressure to kind of, when people are on the line, go one way or the other. So in any case, eligible families will get payment based on all of their qualifying dependents claimed on their return, including older relatives like college students, adults with disabilities, parents, and grandparents, which is another huge area where no one really got a benefit because, again, if they're claimed as a dependent, then parents and grandparents, you would think that would, you get payment for that, but no. So now this time you should because they'll be a dependent. So unlike the first two payments, this third stimulus payment is not restricted to children under 17. So that was the big threshold problem that they removed this time, which was good. So at least it'll be easier. You can debate whether it's a positive thing, whatnot, but probably be easier to send out the money in that way. So because these payments are automatic for most eligible people, contacting either financial institutions or the IRS on payment timing will not speed up the arrival. So they're basically saying, don't call us. It's on autopilot right now at this point in time, and there's probably not much you're going to be able to do if you contact the IRS or your financial institution once they've issued the payments, and then they start to go through whatever issues and problems. There inevitably going to be some issues and problems, even though they should have it down better now since this is the third time they've done it. Then we'll get further guidance on what to do at that point in time, hopefully. So the amount of an eligible individual's EIP 3 will be based on the taxpayer's latest processed tax return from either 2020 or 2019. Many people probably haven't filed 2020, especially since I think they extended the deadline for it. So if you haven't filed 2020, then they're going to base it on the 2019. It should be very basic in terms of what they're going to be sending out, because it's tied to, in essence, just someone's social security number, right? The dependents don't matter as much, so it's going to be really pretty straightforward who gets the 1,400 because they're sending it out by basically individual, although there is an income limitation, and that could have an impact. So if you're thinking about, filing 2020 or 2019, like if you hadn't filed 2020 and your income for whatever reason was higher in 2020, then if you didn't file, it could have been a good thing, because then they would base it on 2019 and possibly give you a payment. But most people's income's probably lower in 2020, so you might have the reverse problem, which would be if you didn't file 2020 and your 2019 income was over the AGI threshold, then your payment might be lower than it would be if you had it based on the 2020 numbers, but your 2020 numbers aren't there because you haven't filed yet. And it was much lower because you got crushed in 2020, possibly, right? You don't have the income, and therefore your AGI was lower. So if you're in that situation, you would think the same kind of remedy would basically happen here. These economic impact payments ultimately being tied or being prepayments of now the tax return for 2021, and then if nothing else, be able to remedy the situation by filing something similar to the recovery rebate credit when you file the 2021 taxes in 2022. That you would think you'd have a similar remedy, although it would take some time to work that particular remedy out since it's towards the beginning of the year, but we'll get further guidance on that when those types of issues come up. So this includes anyone who registered online at irs.gov using the agency's non-filer tool last year or submitted a special simplified tax return to the IRS. So this is another one. It should go a lot more smoothly this time, because last time, anyone that wasn't in the system, because they don't normally file, for example, the IRS spent a whole lot of time just trying to get people to get into this tool to give them the information they need just to send out the economic impact payments. They did that for a long time last year, so they should have all the information and not need to do that again this year, and hopefully they got the information to make it go smoothly. So if the IRS has received and processed a taxpayer's 2020 return, the agency will instead calculate the amount on the individual's EIP-3 based on that return. If a taxpayer's payment is less than the full amount and is based on their 2019 return, they may qualify for a supplemental payment after they file their 2020 return. So there it is. There's the kind of remedy they're starting to talk about. Well, if we base it on 2019, then it's possible that someone hit the AGI limitation in 2019, but then they got crushed in 2020, but we couldn't base it on 2020 because they don't have the 2020 yet. So they're saying here, in that situation, if that were to happen, they may qualify for a supplemental payment after they file their 2020. So I'm assuming that maybe the IRS is saying we're going to pick that up ourselves by when you file 2020 return. If there was a cap that was put on it and you made less than 2020, maybe they'll be able to process that without you having to do anything except file the 2020 return. But let's read on and check it out. So the IRS will automatically reevaluate the eligibility. Wow, that's nice. If the agency determines they are entitled to a larger payment or the full payment, it will send them a supplemental payment covering the difference between what they originally received and the larger amount. So it looks like they're going to make that automatic. So in other words, once again, let me just kind of recap. This is kind of weird. They're going to base the economic impact payment on 2019 if you hadn't filed the 2020 return, but you might have had a lot more income in 2019 than 2020 because you didn't get crushed in 2019 by the whole thing that happened. So then in 2020, you did get crushed, but if they base it on 2019, then you're going to have an income threshold possibly hit, and they won't send you the full amount of the economic impact payment, which you should have got because you got crushed in 2020. But then if you file the 2020 tax return, they should automatically see that they paid you something less than what they should have paid you based on that information and reevaluate the estimate based on 2020 without you having to do anything other than file the 2020 tax return, which you'd have to do anyways. That's my interpretation. You know, take it for what you will with it. We'll get more information on it as we go, I'm sure. If the reevaluated amount is smaller, they won't need to pay back the difference. Wow, and if they reevaluate it and it's smaller, then you don't have to pay back the difference. So aside from filing 2020 tax return, no action is needed on their part. So that sounds like you get the best of both worlds. So that means if your 2019 tax return was lower for whatever reason, your AGI was under the threshold, and your 2020 tax return was higher, meaning if they based it on 2020, they would be limiting the amount of the payment, but if they base it on 2019, they would not limit it. You would think that they would try to take money back from you in that situation, possibly, but they're saying no, they're not. That's my interpretation of it. So here we go. In addition, the IRS will automatically send EIP-3 to people who didn't file a return but received Social Security, retirement, survivors or disability benefits, SSDI, railroad retirement benefits, supplemental security income, SSI, or veterans affairs benefits. So like they did last time, if you don't file a tax return because you're not required to, then they're going to go to these other kind of sources of payments from the government, and if they can pick up the information there, then they'll use that to send out the payment. Or if you used that tool last year to give them the information necessary, they'll use that information to give out the economic impact payments this time. So they should have everything they need to get these things out this time. So this is similar to the first and second rounds of economic impact payments. Social Security and other federal beneficiaries will generally receive the third payment the same way as their regular benefits. The IRS is working directly with the Social Security Administration, the Railroad Retirement Board, and the Veterans Administration to obtain updated 2021 information for recipients to ensure it is sending automatic payments to as many people as possible. More information about when these payments will be made will be provided on irs.gov as soon as it becomes available. While payments will be automatic for many people based on their federal benefits information, some may need to file a 2020 tax return even if they don't usually file to provide information. The IRS needs to send payments for any qualified dependents. So note they did this last year. They tried to get everybody to give them the information if they don't file a tax return, and they didn't have any other information from federal payments. But there still might be some people that they don't have all the information they need, and if they don't, then you have to file the 2020 tax return so that they can get the information they need, which could include the individual and possibly any dependents that they don't have in their records to qualify for. So people in this group should file a 2020 tax return to be considered for an additional payment for their dependent as quickly as possible. And you should be able to do that for free if you're not required to file, because they have the free file tools where you can get access to software to do that. So it should be a fairly basic return, although you gotta go do it online and do the whole thing that way. But in any case, special reminder for those who don't normally file a tax return. People who don't normally file a tax return and don't receive federal benefits may qualify for these stimulus payments. This includes those experiencing homelessness and others. If you're eligible and didn't get a first or second economic impact payment, that is an EIP 1 or EIP 2, or got less than the full amounts, you may be eligible for the 2020 recovery rebate credit, but you'll need to file the 2020 tax return. So that means round 1 and round 2 basically were tied to 2020 and were thought of as prepayments of the 2020 tax return, whereas round 3 was after the 2020 tax return. And so if you didn't get the round 1 or round 2, or you didn't file or you didn't get it and you want to get the money, then you got to file the 2020 tax return and file for the recovery rebate credit for those. Round 3 then isn't directly tied to the 2020 tax return, but it is going to use 2020 in some ways possibly to estimate what the payment will be. And you would think that the round 3 would ultimately be tied to the 2021 tax return, but they're still going to use the 2020 tax return in order to kind of estimate it if they have it. In other words, they'll estimate it on the 2019 tax return. If they don't have 2019, they'll estimate it on the 2020 tax return. Is how I'm understanding it. So see the special section on irs.gov claiming the 2020 recovery rebate credit if you aren't required to file a tax return. So there's a link to that here. The tax return preparation is available for qualifying people, so you can go to that link here, free tax return preparation. The IRS reminds taxpayers that the income level in this new round of stimulus payments have changed. This means that some people won't be eligible for the third payments even if they received a first or second economic impact payment or claimed a 2020 recovery rebate credit. Payments will begin to be reduced for individuals making $75,000 or above. So if you're an individual tax return filer, $75,000 or above adjusted gross income, it'll start to phase out, and it'll phase out fast from there. And if you're married filing joint, then it would be the $150,000 or above, and then it'll phase out from there. The payments end at, if you're an individual, $80,000. So $75,000 to $80,000. If your AGI, if your income is in there, then if it's past 80, you're not going to get anything for the third round. For individuals, and $160,000 for married filing joint, you won't get anything if your adjusted gross income is above that for married filing joint. People above these levels are ineligible for the payment. More information is available in Fact Sheet 2021-05 updated details about the third round of economic impact payments. There's a link to that here. There'll be a link to this in the description.